Welcome back to the Speaking and Communicating podcast. I am your host, Roberta Ndlela. If you are looking to improve your communication skills, both professionally and personally, this is the podcast you should be tuning into. Communication and soft skills are crucial for your career growth and leadership development. And by the end of this episode, log on to Apple and Spotify and leave us a rating and a review. Now let's get communicating with comedian and entrepreneur, founder of Plausible, Leanne Linsky, all the way from Seattle. She's here to talk to us about her journey of starting open mics and leading her to be an entrepreneur and how comedy can be used as strategies to help us with our public speaking and communication skills. And before I go any further, please help me welcome her to the show. Hi, Leanne.
Hello, thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you for being here. It's my pleasure. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy that you're here.
Thanks. This is gonna be fun. I
I can
love
Im-
talking, so this is a perfect place.
Fun and comedy, they totally go together.
Yes.
Absolutely. I'm glad you love talking because there's so much we want to extract from you. But before we get into that, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I actually started out in business and worked a regular job through high school, and then went to college for business and ended up at a big Fortune 500 company. And I was there for almost 13 years. But during that time, I did a lot of public speaking, and
Mm-hmm.
I found myself doing training and presenting and all the things. And I come from a very funny family, who has a wonderful sense of humor, and I thought, I wanna do some jokes here and there, make it fun. I don't
Mm-hmm.
wanna be that boring person. So, I took a comedy writing class, back in 2001, and I loved it. And then one of my coworkers was like, "You should take an improv class." And I was like, "What?" And I'm originally from the Chicago area,
Oh.
and I am very familiar with the second city, and it just so happened I had gone off to school in Las Vegas, and the second city had a training center in Las Vegas, and I was like, "I did not know this. How did I not know?" And so I had all these signs that popped up, like, a couple of times in a matter of a week or 2, and I was like, "Well, this must be meant to be." And I went and I signed up for a class, took them all 2 and 3 times, I kid you not, over a period of years. And
Mm-hmm.
then I had been with this company for almost 13 years, ended up getting laid off, and my friend was like, "What are you gonna do?" I'm like, "I don't know." He's like, "Well, I'm moving to New York. Do you wanna go?" And I was like, "I'll think about it." He's like, "You have 1 hour." I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, because I gotta tell him an answer on the sublet." And I was like, "Okay." So an hour later, I call him back, I go, "Okay, I'm in." And a month later, I moved to New York City and pursued it full time. So I did it on the East Coast and West Coast and everything, and I did open mics I hosted an open mic in New York City for over 7.5 years and wrote a one-woman show and did commercials and acting in theater and whatnot, and then moved to LA and continued producing shows and things like that in LA, but I spent more time on the freeway than I did on stage, and that's just bananas, and I was like, "How do I bridge that gap?" So I started doing things online, and that was before COVID, and
Mm-hmm.
then, um and then COVID happened, obviously, and people got excited about doing everything online, because how else are we gonna get things done? And so people did, all of that, and, I was like, "This is great," but the existing technologies, they're specific, like, there's things for podcasting, there's things for business conferencing, there's things for school, but there wasn't something specifically for entertainment, comedy kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
because so I'm like, "How do I fix that?" And so Plausible was a seed in my mind, and I went back to school and got a degree in innovation and entrepreneurship, and got involved in incubators and accelerators and built a team and built Plausible and launched. So now I do all my comedy online. So
Mm.
that was a lot of word quota I just met.
No, we love your story, especially how you got started with the open mics and that. But is that when you say there's different types of tech for each of those industries, is that what you call techtainment?
Yeah, some people call it techtainment, or media. technology or entertainment technology. People have
Mm.
abbreviated it to like techtainment or, um, streaming services, just like fun names for what it is to differentiate it because, everybody's familiar with like a Zoom or a Google Meets or Team, Google, and all that kind of stuff. But
Mhm.
I don't use any of that. We built our own so that it's specific to the needs of a performer and how we can get audience feedback in real time. But more so than that, a bigger problem that I wanted to solve with it is so that performers could actually earn money and kind of democratize it because right now, if you wanna earn money for your performing, you have to have like a minimum of 10,000 followers to get ads or sponsorships, or you have to meet all of these, high bars of success before you get anything paid, but on Plausible, you could sell 1 ticket and you're making the majority of the revenue. So, you don't have
Mm.
to have a minimum, you just have to produce a show and put it up and invite, spread the word, and then Plausible also helps in, we'll give you shout outs on social media and our newsletter and stuff like that, and then you charge a ticket price and you make the majority of that money, which a comedy club, uh, there are exceptions of but typically, comedians don't get paid a split of the door, they get a flat fee or they don't get paid at all, so
Right. And
mhm.
the thing is, so does that mean that with regards to what was recently the writer's strike, if you were implausible, you were not affected?
No, because, comedians aren't union. They're not
Oh.
stand-up comedy is not under, union rules or anything, it's completely different.
Mm,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah.
And therefore, so back to when you do open mic, for instance,
Mhm.
when you are a comedian and you're standing in the front and you're telling jokes, we've always noticed that there's usually this pause. We talk about the pause a lot when you're speaking. You have the pause and then you have the punchline. How do comedians learn that? Like you said, you went to school. Do they learn that, or it's just something that comes with telling jokes? When you are funny, that's how you know.
I think it's a bit of both to some degree. Some people can naturally feel like the rhythm or the beat of a joke, and other people, maybe it doesn't come so naturally to, and they have to practice that and learn, from going too quickly and not having a pause. And sometimes we don't need a pause depending on the joke or how it's set up. Um,
Mhm.
but to your point, that is very common, and I think it really takes practice, and I think the key to that is having a well-written joke typically, and
Mhm.
sometimes people are good off the cuff, but more often than not, believe it or not, everything's been practiced very much so that it appears off the cuff and, um and unrehearsed, and more natural. But all of that timing is what open mics are for, and, as a comedian, we spend a ton of time getting up in open mics for free and working out our jokes and putting it out there and changing the timing. It's like writing a song, right? Um,
Yeah.
how does this work? How does it sound? Are people receptive? Maybe that didn't sound right. Maybe I need to change things up here and there because if people do write down their jokes, like I'm a huge proponent of writing things down, but
Mhm.
when I write different than I speak, right? Um,
Yes,
it's a different thing.
usually, so yeah, I'm the same, I think. If I
It's
write something, I'm not gonna speak it exactly the way I wrote it. Just the ideas will be the same, but not the way I phrased the
right,
writing. Yeah.
right, because if you hear people read right off the paper, you're like, "You're clearly reading," because no one speaks like that, and then when we transcribe something like a conversation and we look at it, we're like, "Whoa, what is that word?" You know, confetti. I don't even know what
Rambling.
happened there, right? Like the transcript of a podcast, it's like, does she even know what she's doing? You know, I always dread reading what I said out loud. I'm like, "That sounds so bad." Um, but but truly, we speak different and communicate differently on the written page than we do when we deliver it, and jokes are similar to that. Like, if I write things down, when I speak it, then I really hear how it lands. I can change the meaning of a sentence by
Mhm.
tone, body language, timing, word emphasis. All of those things make a substantial difference in what something is how something is communicated. So all of that, although I might have the joke written out, now I have to deliver it. And how do I package that? That has to be practiced too. So that pause that you're asking about, I think it's a bit of both, and some people have it more naturally than others.
Mm. Here's another thing I've noticed with comedians, which is a skill that I'd like to learn and be better at. When you, if there's two things you're going to mention, you mention the first one is the thing that's not as funny, but the
Mhm.
second one is going to be the funny thing. Or
Yeah.
if it's two things and they're different sizes, you first mention the smaller size and then the bigger size is the when this bigger size is mentioned, then that's what makes it funny because you started saying something smaller. I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm making sense.
You make
That
complete sense. Yeah.
yeah, would you
Yeah.
how do you guys do that? Because that's when it's funny.
Well, it's called heightening. Well, some people
Hmm.
call it heightening, some people might call it something else, but I know it as heightening, and so we heighten as we go, because when you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, it would be like if someone gave me an engagement ring and then they gave me a pair of socks. I mean, that's kind of like anticlimactic. I would be like, "Great, and what?" Like, "What?
Uh,
Where did we go? What just
take
happened here?"
take the socks back.
Yeah, I don't care about the socks. I'm focused on the ring.
Mm,
I think it's that way with a joke, and what we love as audience members are patterns. So as a
mm,
comedian builds with something, things are typically in 3s and 5s. Odd
mhm,
numbers for whatever reason, really people, "Oh, we love that." We don't know why, but it's like a certain beat in a song or a certain rhythm in a song, a good hook. Our
mhm,
brains are attracted to that catchy pattern. But when with comedy, what we do as comedians is we'll say, like, for instance, I got a Roomba, or no, so wait, it goes, everything's going up, the price of a cup of coffee, the price of cars, the price of homes, everything except my comedy career, right? Or,
yes, and
you
then that's
build.
when it's funny. Mm,
Yes, and then, speaking of sucking, my Roomba, and then I can segue into something like that. So it goes up, and we think we're gonna talk about something else going up, and then instead, I throw a curve in there and say it's something that's not getting better, that's not going.
mm.
But if you think of it in terms of the engagement, you're right, like, engagement ring? Socks. Nope. So
Exactly. And also the way you built that up, the heightening, speaking of engagement, you engage your audience in the sense that they know there's going to be something else. Huh, I wonder what that is just before you mention it. So they're already trying to conclude in their minds and trying to guess basically to say, I wonder what
right?
she's going to mention because, it's the
Yeah.
next thing after that. Yes.
Yeah, right? It might be like if I were telling a joke about a relationship, he took me out to dinner, he brought me flowers, and then he presented a ring, right? Like
Hmm.
our mind is like, that is what we know is typical.
Yeah.
He took me to dinner, he brought me flowers, and then he introduced me to his new girlfriend. I mean, it's like,
The
oh,
curveball.
okay, there's the curveball, right? Yeah.
Right. And then let's talk about irony
Mhm.
in in comedy. One moment you yeah, okay, I heard the curveball, but sometimes there's just the complete opposite when you make a joke about it. And so when the opposite comes, that's the funny part.
Yeah, it
Mm.
is. So I'm trying to think of an example of uh opposite. All of a sudden I'm blanking on my jokes of like what would be opposite. But oh, I know. So I dated someone long distance, and everything was really going great. And then I received this text from him that said we needed more space. It's
Oh,
like
like
kind
you
of
already
like
didn't have it.
yeah, a curveball. Like, really? That's what he texted you? Yeah, true story. Who knew?
Like,
Sometimes it just
there's
writes
already
itself.
enough space. You want more?
Yeah, right. So,
Mm.
I don't know if that's a really good example of opposite, but it's, like, not what we would anticipate getting, you know?
Yes,
It's
because we
that kind
laugh when they say the opposite of where we thought the story was going.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we usually try to deduce where this might be going, and then suddenly they take us the opposite direction, and that's when we find it funny. And also we love how comedians, like I said, engage with audiences. Sometimes when the audience laughs, instead of him telling the next story, he'll look and say, it's funny, isn't it? Or say something, or say, yeah, the man in front of the, in the front row seat is the, you think that's the, and they ask a question about the joke they just told to the one who's laughing the most in front of them. Just that ease with the audience members is what a lot of us strive to have when we're speaking.
Mhm. Yeah, that takes practice. That takes a lot of practice, and it takes practice in a couple of ways, right?
Mhm.
So, when you when people are most familiar with, like, doing a presentation, right? Not necessarily comedy, but even in a presentation, if I have prepared and practiced my presentation well, I pretty much know it by heart, you know?
Right.
I have it memorized. I'm not referring to my notes because I find that presenting on something I know well makes it easier for me to memorize it, and if I organize my presentation correctly, it's logical. So it flows in a very natural order. So when I do my jokes in my set, I have them specifically laid out in an order that makes it easy and like, "Oh, of course that joke comes next," kind of thing, because it just
Mm.
makes it easier for an audience to follow. It makes it easier for me to remember because it's logical, right? And then
Mm.
when I have prepared a set and practice it in such a way and I know it from front to back, I know my jokes. What happens is I do not like to riff. Some comedians do, but this is a personal preference. I find that if I riff in my set, I ramble. Like it's that word salad of like what is happening right now. And
Mm.
when we're speaking on comedy, it's timing is super important. And if I add words and start muddying the waters with extra information, I don't get to the punchline, and people are now leaving, going to the bathroom, getting a drink, like, looking at their cell phone. So I gotta stay on point and make my point so that it's easy for people to listen. Because think about it, if all music like, jazz would be an exception, jazz is all improvised, but even there's rules in jazz in which they maintain in order to keep it music, right?
Right.
But a song in general is it has structure, and so should a presentation, and so should a set. So in my mind, if I put together the structure and do it away now going back to crowd work takes practice just to work with a crowd and how you respond and how quick you can be on your feet. And
Mhm.
typically, if I'm doing a set and I know I can tell you what is gonna get a big laugh and what's not gonna get a big laugh or not gonna get a big laugh because I practiced. So now I know where I can naturally interject something to the audience. And if I know my set well enough and I somehow something happens in the audience that's unexpected, I can step away from my prepared set and
Mm.
easily flow and handle whatever situation's happening in the audience and then find my way back smoothly to my set. But if I don't know my set well and I have a heckler or something happen in the audience, chances are it will mess me up and I'll be like, "Oh, I need a drink of water, like, what is happening?" Gather myself. So if I've prepared and practiced my jokes well enough, if I'm doing a show, I typically don't do new material, like, to the degree of, like, brand new, I've never worked it out before in front of an audience. My stuff
Right.
is better tight because if people are paying to see me, they should get someone who knows what they're doing. So it takes a lot of preparation on that side, and crowd work in itself, I think, is an art. And I think a great example, have you ever seen there's a movie with, Steve Martin where he has a really big nose.
Steve
Uh,
Martin, big nose. Pinocchio? No.
no, it's not Pinocchio, it's a comedy with Steve Martin, and he has a really big nose, and it's escaping me what Roxanne, I believe it's called Roxanne,
Oh, I haven't
and
seen it.
he he is in a bar and so a guy picks on him, like bullies him because, oh, and makes fun of him because he has this big giant nose. And so Steve Martin turns around and he goes, "Oh, you think you're funny? You think that's the funniest thing you can come up with? Well, I've got news for you." And then he went on for like 10 minutes in this movie and he did all the jokes about his own big nose and worked the crowd and did all of that. And the I think that's a great example of he didn't just come up with those. He lived his whole life with a big nose. That he's
Mm,
practiced those jokes. He knows they're funny. He's done them before, he's worked them out. And in my mind, when I work my material, Steve Martin, although it seemed off the cuff in a moment in a bar fight, here's a guy who his whole life, he knows these jokes like the back of his hand, and he delivered them brilliantly in in the movie as a character. But that's how comedians are. To, everyone else in the bar, it's like, "Whoa, this guy's on fire. He's really riffing these jokes out." But truly, it's a lifetime of practice.
mm. It sounds to me that comedians find it easier to make self-deprecating jokes
Mhm.
compared to because public speakers are usually serious. Comedy is about being funny anyway. Do you think that it's kind of harmful to a business setting to make self-deprecating humor?
I can see where it could be. Yes. I could see depending on how this is very, self-deprecating, there's a fine line with it, and I've done it where I've totally, you know, stunk up the stage. I bombed, it was terrible. And I notice when typically if I'm got my timing down and I'm delivering it correctly, it
Hmm.
shouldn't be. But it's how we deliver it. Are we delivering it and coming from a place of victim, or feel bad for me? You got to come out with confidence with it. And I
Yeah.
think like Steve Martin in the example I gave of, I think the movie is Roxanne, he's self-deprecating, he's making fun of himself this whole time, but the crowd is cheering him on because he is doing it with such zest and such, like, gusto, like, "Look at me, I'm hilarious and I'm making fun of my own nose. You guys got nothing on this guy." And I think the same would go for a business person. If you come off as confident and still kind of humble yourself and be vulnerable, but you have control of that vulnerability,
Hmm.
that's the very empowering because it can draw people in, you can make yourself relatable, but you're you're in control of the narrative of that joke, if that
Mm. So
makes sense.
you are able to keep the power rather
Yes.
than feel that you've lost it just because it's a
Yeah.
reflection on you. Because that's when
Yeah.
a lot of people, the nerves kick in and they feel that they're being judged by the audience and they feel like, oh, something went wrong. They're gonna think I'm not a good speaker. Whereas a comedian usually they know how to just shoot from the hip and take control of the situation with another joke.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when those things like I find even in presenting for business or something, if I can open it up with some sort of joke or something, um, to ease into the presentation to make myself human to the
Hmm.
audience and to bring forth some sort of smile, I think, that puts me at ease, right? Because I I think anytime whether people are performing comedy or doing a presentation, I'm rooting for the person. I want them to succeed because I do not wanna sit there for an hour and be
And not
bored.
laugh.
I mean, that's painful. I don't wanna see anybody go through that. The audience never typically wants to see anyone fail. We're there to be entertained and to learn or be educated. So, I think, I've seen it too where the opposite could be true, where someone comes out and they're like, "Let's hear it. Let me hear it from you." And then they get the crowd all fired up like something big's gonna happen, and they're like, "Okay, and here's my PowerPoint." And then I'm like, "What just happened?" Like, "That
Uh,
you sold me you sold me a lie." You know? Like, that's not who you are as a presenter.
refund.
It's like, "What? You just, reeled me in, and now I'm here and I can't leave." So, I think it can be mismatched either way. So,
Mm,
I think it takes, practice, and I think there's opportunity, like, if you're practicing I used to practice all my presentations for school. My mom and dad always had me practice, and I value that so much because, then if something happened and I tripped or I, flubbed a word or something, I it was easy to be in the moment with it because I was so prepared with everything else. I could be like, "Oh, that just that just happened. Okay,
mm,
move on," and I everything else would be okay. Um, but I find that for me, those things would trip me up, and I don't see it as self-deprecating as much as defeated. Um,
yeah.
feeling the don't, brush off the defeat and own it, I mean, if you trip or fall, "Well, look at me, I'm okay, everybody," It's like, "Good thing for you, I can talk better than I can walk." So
Exactly. Oh, you see?
right?
That's a joke right there. Yes.
Right, and
Mm,
if you're worried about those things, like, is the mic not working or people not hearing you, practice that. Practice walking into the room. What would you do if you tripped? What would you say? And then come up with 10 different things that you could say. Because when people do crowd work, when comedians do crowd work, a
mm,
lot of it they've done before. Because audience member they're doing the same set, so the response from the audience tonight, tomorrow, and the next night is gonna be very similar. So,
mm.
even though they pick on someone in the front row for this, they if you go to 3 more of this comedian shows, you're gonna hear him say the same things to the audience members.
Oh, practice, practice. You literally make it second nature to you.
Yes,
Mm.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've heard my dad's jokes so many times, but they're always funny to me, because and he works it. My dad's he has very good comedic timing and same with my brothers, but I think it can become your thing, certain comedians have their sayings or their things and it's okay to repeat it. And typically people are like, "Well, I did that joke the other night." Yeah, but this is a whole different audience. They
Mm,
haven't
they
heard it.
haven't heard it. They haven't heard it. And let's
Yeah.
go back to the technique that you shared earlier about structuring your joke such that you don't forget. And even if something distracts you, you are able to come back because there's a certain structure. Can you just walk us through that again? And I want to see how we can apply it to public speaking.
Absolutely. I think I took it from my experience in public speaking, and, I look at my set as, I structure it in this way. Here's my big secret sauce.
Yeah.
Um, I open with something that's about me personally, like my name or something like that. I start with something a little bit personal, and when I do presentations, I open with something, other than, "Hi, my name is."
Mm,
Meh,
mm,
you know, I don't wanna hear like, someone just introduced me, why am I repeating it? If you have a good host or MC the only time I do it is I have a joke because sometimes people mispronounce my name, so I have a joke in a fun way in which I can correct it or so that people can remember. So I have a joke about my name, but it's never, "Hi, my name is," type thing.
mm,
So I do something that opens it up, and then, I start my jokes with jokes that are most, um, audience friendly, like, not shocking, right? So as I go through, then I heighten, and
yeah.
I can maybe get away with something riskier at the end because I built trust with my audience. So I
Mm,
have to build trust. So I come out and I bring people in. I'm personable. I'm a human, whatever that is, depending on what environment I'm in, right? And I can change my opening joke because if I'm doing a clean corporate show, of course I'm not going to do a dirty joke or something that could be misunderstood or have people sent to HR. right?
Oh,
I'm
no,
right
no,
away, like,
we don't want that.
you don't want that. And that's very important to know your audience, to know how you're gonna open and what's gonna, connect you immediately. You wanna create a sense of belonging with your audience. It could just be one line, that just whatever that is, that makes it a little bit more personal than "How's the weather?" Or "My name is this," or, something. And then, um, and then I ease into my jokes and I build. And my jokes, sometimes every comedian is different on what kind of material they write, but I try to thread it together so it's common sense. So if I'm talking about, "Oh, this is who I am. Oh, this is what I'm wearing today. I picked this because," then I have like a joke about relationship and shoes, and then I can go into relationships and it just segues, right? There'll
Mhm.
be a piece of this that, like, speaking of this, then I go into that, and then it builds, and my more edgier material will come later in the set because I am building trust. I'm getting laughs, I'm bringing people along this journey with me, and it's, and not every joke is connected to the last joke, but I try to think, like, if I just talked about this, it makes sense to put it here because it kinda leads to the next thing. So,
Mm.
in a presentation, I think it's nice to set expectations of what I'm gonna talk about, like, make that somehow personable, be like, so, something to, like, bring people in, whether it's a very short story and that is a personal story, and then we're like, and that leads us to the topic of today of what? That's a personal example or a case study, and this is the piece of gold that we're gonna really focus in on today, and we're gonna cover 3 key things. And then you make sure you do 1, 2, and 3, and then you in each thing, like, to share a story about people love stories, right?
I'm about to say, because I was going to ask how, all this stuff, whenever you tell a joke and give examples, you
Mhm.
were saying, the boyfriend said this and we were long distance. That's a story. Y- I find that comedians easily incorporate stories and they don't need to be long.
No?
A story doesn't need to be a long story. Just those examples you were given, that's the skill that we want to master as well.
Yeah. They can be very short, but people remember stuff that is personal, or I love a good story. I mean, we
Mm.
love watching most people, we binge watch Netflix because we love a good story, right?
Stories.
And
Mm.
stories can convey your message in such an entertaining way. So, you can at the opening, you're gonna like set the expectations, bring people in and be like, "This is what we're gonna talk about today," and then these 3 takeaways or these 5 takeaways or whatever it is, and then each takeaway, number 1, it's, uh, you know, uh number 1 would be, introducing yourself at a networking event. Let's just talk about that. How do you approach somebody? So 1 is the approach, 2 is what do you say? And 3, how do you not make it transactional, right? And so
Mm.
number 1, how do you approach somebody? Well, let me tell you about a time, or let me tell you about Mary. And Mary went to a networking event and and maybe an example, right? Of
Mhm.
something that went wrong, and you'll be like, "So, here's the things that we see that went, you know, sideways. What if Mary had actually gone in and had this conversation, and did this and approached the person this way, and then tell a story about someone who did it successfully? Great, now we know the approach. Number 2, what do we say?" Now that Mary's made the approach and she's got someone's attention, they're like, "Mary, what do you do?" And then maybe it's, someone does anyone have a personal, experience in this, and what do you say? Maybe that you call on someone in your audience, or how do you again, do you tell another story? Do you, you know, just a one-liner, maybe some examples or something like that, and then you go into number 3, how do we not make it transactional? How do you carry on a conversation? And then maybe you're like maybe it's another example, but And then at the end, you're like, "So we just covered 3 key things. So thanks to Mary. Mary gave us examples of this. Remember she did that, and we
Mhm.
switched it and it was brilliant. And then we did this, this, and this, and we covered all of those things." So when you walk away today, I want you to think back to that original story I told you when I came in the room. What did I say to you when I first walked in? You could tie it in and bookend it. And now but you've taken everything you wanted to do in that presentation and you made it unique to you as a speaker, and you made it memorable because you connected with people on a human level.
Memorable, which is what, whenever you speak, if you do comedy, if you've been on stage, you want people to remember
Yeah.
you.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah, unless I completely stink it up.
Unless nobody laughs. Have you been in a scenario where the joke didn't land, nobody laughed, and then you
Oh.
switched it up quickly?
Yeah, that's happened a lot, to be honest. I think that's just part of comedy. I have to tell a lot of bad jokes, especially in open mics. I mean, I ran an open mic for 7.5 years, and I had a lot of regulars. They're not gonna laugh at anything that's not funny. So, even in shows, I've done shows where I was like, "I'm so ready for the show," and I went in there and I just somehow started off on the right foot and couldn't get it back or, try to get it back. There were times where someone before me completely just was terrible and walked a couple tables, got up and walked out, and then I was, like, left with half the room, and I had to bring those people back, and I was fortunately, I felt like I did a good job doing that, but that's not always the case, and I think the same thing can go for presentation. Challenge here's and sometimes you'll hear comedians say, "Well, that was a terrible audience," and it's like, "Was it?" You know? Was it
Who's
a terrible
terrible in this equation?
Right, and so we have to look at all of that. Another key thing that could influence your audience's response is what was happening before you did your presentation. Was it are th Did they just have a heavy lunch? Have they just been listening to people for 3 hours and haven't had a break yet? Like,
Mhm.
those things can influence an audience, response to anything. The other thing is if I have done comedy between bands, that's, like, the worst. Like, people are like, "Get off the stage, we wanna dance." Nobody wants to hear me tell jokes like, "Brr, brr, brr, I have lobster claws as hands," or like, "No, we wanna hear music." So so there really are instances in which it's not a good audience for you. And so you have to know where am I in the schedule? Where am I
Mhm.
in the lineup? Am I first? Are people going to be coming in late? Am I last? Are people going to be leaving early? Are they going to be checking their phone, packing up their things? Like in a comedy club, there's a place called the check spot. And that's when the waitress comes by and puts the check down for everybody to pay their drinks. Nobody wants the check spot because everybody's going, wait a minute, here's my oh, they charged us how much for drinks? And you're like, "Hey, I'm up here doing jokes, I'm hilarious." And they're like, "Nobody cares."
They're
And
busy
that's called
making
a
me
check.
pay for drinks here.
Yeah. So there are instances in which what has happened before or maybe what's gonna happen after if they're all gonna go to happy hour and you're the last person up, and people are like, "Make it quick." You better be interesting. So
And
so
I'm
there are
sure
those factors. Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead. What I'm saying is, I'm sure that a lot of speakers as well, because if you're a keynote speaker, there's been an agenda for the whole day, and you're going to
Mhm.
deliver for 45 minutes, you're going to be somewhere in that list.
Yep.
So some might have been bored, like you said, they haven't had a 3 hour break, and all of those kinds of things. There's a lot of factors that go into that. Leanne, any last words for presentations and public speaking, that any strategies they can take away from comedians to better their presentations?
Yeah, I think I'll give you 3. So my
Please.
favorite one is practice. Practice, 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 practice. Practice your presentation, not so much word for word, but practice so that you're comfortable that if anything else happens in the moment, you're not flustered and sweating profusely, to get back to what you have memorized. Um, 2, be kind to yourself, right? Public
Hmm.
speaking is, like, one of the biggest, most fearful things up there with death for most people, like, that is it's
Yeah.
it's it's terrifying, right? And I still get nervous, and I consider my nerves to be the respect that I pay the audience. It means I care, and that's
Hmm.
okay to feel nervous. That is completely normal, but be kind to yourself, you know? Um, and then 3, have fun. Find a way to incorporate a smile of your own. Bring a smile to the situation, you know? And if you find yourself being flustered, step back, deep breath, and just look at everybody and smile. It's contagious. Smiling is contagious. And if you just walk down the street, practice smiling at people, people will smile back. They may
True.
wonder what you're up to, but they will smile back. It's contagious. So just practice, be kind to yourself with the nerves. That's the respect we pay your audience. And 3, smile. When in doubt, throw a smile out there.
When in doubt, smile. Words of wisdom from Leanne Linsky, the founder of Plausible. Leanne, please just repeat this one last statement you made earlier that the audience is rooting for you.
The audience is rooting for you. Yes.
Thank you so very much. And before you go, where can we find you on social media and on the web?
Yeah, you can find me at plausible.com, plauzzable.com. And you can find me on social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at plausible.
I will put all of those on the show notes, plausible.com. Thank you, Leanne Linsky. Don't forget to
Thank you.
subscribe, leave a rating and a review on Apple and Spotify, and stay tuned for more episodes to come.